I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. OxyContin maker Purdue Pharma is going to pay the state of Oklahoma $270 million to settle a lawsuit over its marketing of opioid. Purdue is facing more than 1,600 other lawsuits, may be forced to declare bankruptcy. Former Times reporter Barry Meier has investigated Purdue Pharma and the opioid epidemic for 20 years, and he joins us later. But first, after an almost 2-year investigation, the Mueller Report has finally been submitted to the Attorney General. The report might be over 300 pages long. All we have so far is a 4-page summary released by William Barr to Congress. President Trump already taking aim at his perceived enemies. Let's hear what he had to say.
There are a lot of people out there that have done some very, very evil things, very bad things, I would say treasonous things against our country.
Here to talk about the political fallout and other news, Eleanor Randolph and Clyde Haberman, contributing writers to the New York Times. One of the stories that I think struck me most this past week in the New York Times was the one that said all the rules have changed since Watergate by this president, that the notion that a president would fire an FBI director, that he would force out an attorney general for failing to protect him from an investigation, that he would dangle pardons before potential witnesses against him, that never happened or didn't appear to have happened in Watergate, and yet it seems to have happened under Trump in this Russia investigation. So, you know, what's going on? Have we?
Well, look, this is a guy. This is a guy who is a disruptor. He is a guy who does not care for the rules, and he's been that way in business, and he's doing that now. I mean, anytime they say something like, you don't get rid of the FBI director just because you know he's not saying what you want him to say, his first reaction is, why not? I can, I'm president. And so we are seeing the powers of the presidency taken to extreme. It's, you know, for people who like Trump and who think this is great, what they ought to do is put the name of somebody else and sort of see how they would feel about somebody else having those same powers.
Disruptor is a very polite way to put it. I think he's frankly a quasi-fascist, and maybe on any given day I'm prepared to drop the quasi. That line that you just showed about that the investigation, the people behind it were treasonous. Treasonous for investigating very reasonable allegations of possible crimes by him and his cohorts. And so it's only, I've covered my share of dictatorial countries. Those are the kind of countries where the leader says, if you oppose me, you're committing treason. This is scary stuff as far as I'm concerned.
It's scary stuff, and he has done these things, but how has the electorate let him get away with it?
Well, I don't know what they do. I mean, unless he's going to be impeached, which doesn't seem likely to happen, there's not much for the electorate to do. I think the electorate did slap him hard by giving the Democrats the majority that they have in the House of Representatives. It didn't work out in the Senate quite as well, but that's because the Democrats had something like 3 or 4 times as many seats that they were vulnerable. That's not going to be the case in 2020. We'll see what happens. You know, he's still, for those, I'll say of us, who think he is frankly a bum, that doesn't change by what happened the other day. And by the way, I don't trust Barr's 4-page synopsis of this any more than I could throw him. So we'll see. Eventually this report will make its way out, and we'll see what's in it. But there's a long way to go. He's still, they don't do triumphalism very well. So right away they were triumphalist, and the first thing he did was harking back on that, we're going to get rid of Obamacare thing. Well, Obamacare happens to be popular. it's going to come back to bite him.
Did both parties overplay their hand in a way? Did the Democrats overplay by putting too much faith in this report, and now the Republicans perhaps doing the same by saying the president has been exonerated, is, not guilty, the same thing as innocent, and when we see these hundreds of pages, we may find things that, are more damning than Barr's summary seems to have said?
Well, I think, I actually think, not in terms of both overplaying their hands, I just think the Republicans have played their hand much better than the Democrats. And the thing they've done with Barr, I don't trust what Barr said either. I mean, those 4 pages, he's said he's an advocate. He is spinning this report.
But presumably the Democrats will spin it their way too.
But what Trump has is he had the first reaction, and he has the way that will sort of cement a lot of minds about what the Mueller report said. And if you looked at CNN, for example, CNN said that the Mueller report had absolved him, and so this is the first thing out. It's going to take a lot for the Democrats to break it down and say, look, it's not what Barr said it was. This is not, he has not been absolved of all criminality here.
It can't be said often enough. We do not know what's in the Mueller report. No matter how many times the headlines say Mueller report says, we don't know it. We know the Barr synopsis and nothing more than that. And as I said, I don't trust that guy one bit.
Let's come a little bit closer to home in Albany. It seems that having a Democratic state Senate really has made a difference.
Well, it has, especially. It's really interesting watching Governor Cuomo. Suddenly, he has to really deal with his fellow Democrats, and they got really upset with him about campaign finance, which I think the ruse in Albany was that they were going to talk about reforming campaign finance, and that was it.
That's much easier to do.
Yeah, you just talk about it. You don't do anything. And so he had this secret dinner. $25,000 a plate.
Raising money for what?
Good question.
That's a good question. I don't know. He said he wasn't going to run for president, and it is getting kind of late for anybody to declare for the presidency.
I don't understand the point of that whole dinner. I sure hope it was good steak that they had, but no, maybe he just can't help himself. I mean, he's spent a lifetime raising money for himself, for his father's campaigns and all the rest, and maybe he's just on automatic pilot. I can't imagine that he's going to be running for president, or who knows. And I've got to believe, I think we've talked about this before in this program, that this has got to be his last term. Any New Yorker who's tried for a 4th term has been shot down, whether it was for mayor or governor. So this is it. So why does he need $25,000 a plate? It got me.
And virtually in secret as well.
Right.
As
Well, maybe he wants to be
David Goodman pointed out.
Yeah. Well, maybe he wants to be a kingmaker. I mean, that's the only sort of thing you can see. But for what? It doesn't make sense. And the worst part of the whole thing, besides the fact that it's not out in the open, as J. David wrote about, the worst part about it is they've decided to slam all these young state senators, women who are alarmed by this, and they should be alarmed by it. They
called it hypocritical, and the governor's press secretary described them as effing idiots. A little harsh.
What they're saying is what people who've been in Albany a long time very often say about a newcomer who's rattling the chains, and that is, they'll get used to it. They'll get into the swing of things.
They'll start
doing things our way. Well, they haven't been wrong for a couple hundred years, but maybe this group of women will show them.
Here's hoping.
Fascinating story by Jeffrey Mays in the Times about a mayor running for president seeming to get very good reviews in New York, except not our mayor.
No, that's Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana.
How do you pronounce his name again?
Buttigieg.
Okay.
Buttigieg.
A name that
Emphasis on the
we
first
should
one.
remember, I think.
Yeah, well, but a name that may disqualify him from running. I think people like to be able to pronounce the names of their presidents, but I could be
There
wrong.
was a song about that in Fiorello, the musical. Huh?
Exactly. But you're asking what, about Mr.
no.
Buttigieg or our mayor?
Well, our mayor, what is he up to?
I don't know. I'll get on my favorite hobby horse. We're taping this on opening day of the baseball season. So not only, again, does he not go to Yankee Stadium, being a Red Sox fan, okay, but he has a press conference in the parking lot of Citi Field, the Mets thing. The Yankees were the team in town. It was almost like he was sticking his thumb in the eye of all of us who actually care about that team.
Well, I don't know. Let's go back to Pete
Okay.
for a second. He is really, to me, I've been watching him like Clyde for a while now, and he is one of the most interesting candidates. I don't know whether he can make it through the 24 other candidates. But every time he gets up and he starts talking, he makes more sense than anybody else.
What distinguishes him, do you think?
Well,
What sets him apart?
Well, first of all, he's so darn smart. He's a veteran. He's so darn smart. He speaks about 8 languages. And I think the thing that sets him apart is that he's a mayor and he has run a city and he's done a really good job of making that city work.
Of course, we haven't had a great record of mayors being elected president, but
No.
maybe it's about time.
He is indeed very smart. Is the country ready for a 37-year-old gay president? My instinct is no, but I've been wrong.
Well, we weren't ready for a billionaire businessman either, so who knows? Thanks to Clyde Haberman, Eleanor Randolph of the New York Times, and coming up next, we'll talk to Barry Meier about OxyContin, the Sackler family, and Purdue Pharma. The CDC reports there were 70,000 drug overdose deaths in the U.S. in 2017. 48,000 of those involved opioids like Purdue Pharma's OxyContin. In 2003, former Times reporter Barry Meier published his book, Painkiller, An Empire of Deceit and the Origin of America's Opioid Epidemic. The book was expanded and revised last year as the opioid crisis in America continues to worsen. Barry, the New York Attorney General this past week went after the Sackler family specifically. There have been a lot of litigation against Purdue Pharma. Now the family even more involved. Who is responsible for this mess? Is it the doctors who prescribed it? Is it the company? Is it the family? Is it the people who are taking this stuff themselves? Is it us for not providing enough treatment and paying for it? Where does the buck stop?
Well, Sam, you're a good journalist because basically you've hit on everybody who's responsible, albeit in different sorts of ways. The story that I sketched out in Painkiller back in 2003 was really about how the seeds of this epidemic were planted. They were planted by both the good intentions of doctors wanting to treat pain more effectively and the hijacking of medicine and science by Purdue Pharma and monies that were provided to doctors and medical associations to prescribe and eventually overprescribe OxyContin and other powerful opioids. So that's where it all began. And along the way, various other actors jump in. I mean, you've got regulators and lawmakers who ignored for years everything that was going on as the death toll mounted, as overdoses mounted, as bad side effects mounted. You had other manufacturers who saw the vast profits that could be made, who jumped in. And then you had drug distributors, the people that buy the drugs and send it to the pharmacies, who realized they could make a fortune also. So they started flooding small towns in Appalachia and wherever with far greater quantities of pain pills than were legitimately needed there.
Why do people take it in the first place?
Well, you know, people are in pain. Some people benefit from these drugs. We can't forget that. These drugs have medical uses in cancer treatment, people who suffer from severe chronic pain, acute short-term treatment of pain, you know, if you're coming out of an auto accident or operation. But what Purdue did and what the advocates of the expanded use of these drugs did was make them acceptable for medical conditions that are far more pervasive in our society. You know, the problem often happens when a drug that is effective in a small population is marketed into the breadbasket of American medicine because the producer wants to make as much money as possible, and that's what happened here.
So was there anything other than evil motivation on the part of the company? I mean, they had to know that they were making and selling so much of this stuff that there couldn't have been that much more pain in America.
Well, I mean, they basically peddled the notion that pain was like the greatest undertreated and ignored problem in American medicine, and OxyContin was a magical answer to the problem. So what happens when there's abuse, when they start seeing the drug being abused? Do they sit back and think, well, are we over-marketing the drug? Are we overselling the drug? No, the problem's with the bad people, the people who are like getting the drugs out of doctors' offices and selling them on the streets, the people who are becoming addicts. You know, the problem with that formulation is that some of these people, unfortunately, were also patients who went in to be treated. You know, there were kids who maybe had like a sports injury or a dental extraction, or middle-aged people who had had a back operation, and they became increasingly dependent and in some cases addicted to the drug.
What did the doctors get out of this?
Well, you know, the doctors got, in the beginning, they got money. They got
paid by the company to prescribe?
Not to prescribe, but they got paid to be speakers for the company. They had like thousands of doctors. Purdue recruited thousands of doctors to go out and basically promote the increased use of drugs like OxyContin to their medical colleagues. So they were bringing down anywhere from $500 to $5,000 for a couple of hours' work.
And where were the regulators in all of this? The, presumably the federal government.
Asleep at the switch. I mean, they made a tragic decision when they approved a label for OxyContin, basically a label that sort of implied that the drug was safer to use than other existing traditional painkillers because of its special formulation. And then when the writing was on the wall that this was, you know, a fantasy, they were very slow to act. They've been very slow in trying to rein in the use of these drugs. I mean, it was remarkable because, you know, I've watched this unfold year after year. And as you mentioned at the beginning, the failures here are colossal. It's not just sort of the avariciousness of an industry. It's the unwillingness of lawmakers and regulators and even people within the medical profession to step up and say, this is a tragedy that's happening. How do we stop it?
And Barry, what about the role, something we don't talk about much in cases like this, of personal responsibility? I mean, were these people addicted and unable to help themselves, or did they not enjoy, but did they, simply benefit from using this drug?
Well, there are all kinds of, routes into addiction, right? There's the medical route, there's the recreational route, and the problem is that when a person does become addicted to an opioid, it's a very, very powerful addiction, and it's a very difficult addiction to break. So, a kid may have started experimenting with pain pills they found in their, parents' closet, or ones they might have even gotten prescribed by a doctor. Then they run out of those. They start going out on the street to get them. They're hard to get there. Then they may graduate to heroin or to more dangerous drugs that are out there now, then like fentanyl, these very deadly counterfeit versions of fentanyl. It's a complicated situation. We want there to be a simple answer to it, but there really isn't.
Well, speaking of simple answers, when we're talking about personal responsibility, what about the Sackler family itself? How much did they know? When did they know it? And how much should they be held personally accountable?
Well, they claim they know nothing. You know?
How could that be?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think in this litigation we're starting to see hints that they may have known far more than they're letting on to. Certainly what we're seeing is that they were very actively engaged in the operation.
And they
of
made
Purdue.
a great deal of money.
They made billions of dollars. You know, the Sacklers today say that, you know, the documents that are coming out in lawsuits that states are using are being cherry-picked. They're being used to malign the company. They're being used to cast the family into a bad light. The problem that they are confronting, however, is that over this past 2 decades, this family could have stepped forward at any time and said, this is a good drug, and we want to make sure that it's used properly, and we want to make sure that the people who are getting addicted to this drug, or drugs like it, are treated properly also. They could have taken the $100 million they promised to the state of Oklahoma this week. They could have done that 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but they didn't. And so now they're in a position where people are saying to them, why did you stand by silently, reaping the benefits of this without addressing the situation?
I know this sort of goes beyond what you've addressed mostly in the book, but what about buildings named after them, monuments named after them, schools named after them, museums named after them? At what point do we separate the giver from what they have done, whether it comes to a
to get
question
their
of
money?
sexual harassment or, you know, something like this where they may be responsible for an opioid epidemic?
I think that's a question that have been grappling with, but rather remarkably, in the last week and a half, you've seen several major institutions, both in England and the U.S., say, we don't want your money anymore. We're not going to take it anymore. What they're going to deal with the name, you know, how they're going to deal with the names on the buildings is a whole nother issue, but I think it speaks to the light that this family has now found itself in.
Barry Meier, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, you could read his book, recently revised, and I'll have some additional thoughts on CODA coming up next. In 1952, when mass transit fares were a dime and most bridges cost a quarter to cross, William Vickery, a Columbia economics professor, conjured up a formula to reduce congestion, raise prices at peak periods. Vickery first proposed his principle for the subway system, then, a few years later, to unclog vehicular traffic. More than 7 decades later, Albany now appears poised to approve a congestion pricing plan for Manhattan. It's much better than no plan, but it's no panacea for a broken system that's vital to the region's survival. For starters, each exception that legislators carve out, each category of vehicle or driver that's exempted, means less money's available to fix mass transit. Thanks to the governor, the plan's got several other drawbacks. No one knows how much money the system really needs to be functional again. In part, that's because no one really knows who's running the MTA. The governor claims to be accountable because he appoints so many board members, but then he bypasses his board and blames it for mismanagement. Board members grovel before the governor, like they always have, but legally they're responsible not to whomever appointed them, but to the agency and its own agenda. Also, the cash from congestion pricing will be coming from drivers in the city. But the revenue won't all be spent on fixing the subways. That's because under the governor's plan, it's being collected by the MTA instead of the city government. To appease suburban legislators, some money will be siphoned off to the commuter railroads, which raises two other concerns. No matter how much money congestion pricing raises, it won't be enough. And as former MTA Chairman Dick Ravitch keeps reminding us, while some other recurring, reliable regional revenue source will be required, fixing the subways first should be everyone's priority. Two more points. In the debate over congestion pricing, Mayor de Blasio managed to efface a four-letter word, toll. As the City Lab blog suggests, let's jettison congestion pricing altogether. Pay to go, premium access, mobility pricing were just some of the other names proposed. Also, remember something that Professor Vickery said. While motorists' gut reaction is that congestion pricing is a tax increase, when their time stuck in traffic is considered, they may eventually consider it a savings. Vickery's own story had a tragic ending, though. 3 days after he won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 1996, he was found dead of a heart attack here in New York, at the wheel of his car. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.